Tea by Heckmate, a Don't Starve fanfiction read by Michelle of UAs-Art. This fic contains no major content warnings or ships, and has the following summary. Weber comes to Maxwell one day when they aren't feeling well. Thank you for listening and enjoy the fic. The height of summer had just begun, and even in this early morning, it was sweltering. Maxwell could feel the heat slowly warming up the interior of his dapper three-piece, even with him huddling close to the endothermic fire. That was the one reprieve from the blazing heat of the season. The warm fire, buzzing and swirling in the fire pit. How nice it felt. He sighed, throwing another log onto the fire. He was just happy it was his turn today to guard the base. Sure, that meant keeping a close eye that nothing burnt down, but it also meant he had the fire pit all to himself.
Mr. Maxwell?
Almost all to himself. Maxwell spun around. He'd completely forgotten that Weber was sleeping all this time in their tent, since no one in the camp had the heart to wake them up. That meant not only did he have to make sure nothing burnt down, he also had to be a babysitter. One of those things he had agreed to, the other he had not. "What do you need?" Maxwell snapped back, never bothering to hide his intense irritation.
It's a bit hot in our tent.
Maxwell took a closer look at the spider child. They stood there wearing their little striped pajamas that were far too big for their small body. Weber held on to the lying robot. Whenever someone dug up a toy, it always went straight to Weber. Maxwell guessed that Weber slept with it like a plush toy. Perhaps it was less cuddly and soft, but as long as it brought the kids some comfort. Weber was positively drenched in sweat. Their spider fuzz was plastered down, and the appendages on their heads drooped, in contrast to the usual perkiness they possessed. They had heavy bags under each of their eyes, and their mouths slacked with a droopy, fanged frown. Goodness, Weber juxtaposed sharply with Maxwell's trim, dapper look. "Hot, eh? Well, take this thermostone and go sit by the endothermic fire." Maxwell tried to barely acknowledge Weber. "Honestly, just do the bare minimum and maybe they'll leave you alone," Maxwell thought bitterly, but Weber persisted.
Mr. Maxwell, we don't feel great.
With that, a rattling cough shook Weber's entire body. Oh, this was just wonderful. Not only did Maxwell have to babysit a child, he had to babysit a sick child. Maxwell stood up to his towering height and walked over. He placed a hand on Weber's forehead. The heat radiating off of them was shocking. Maxwell recalled how warm he himself had felt earlier, even when sitting by the fire. He couldn't even begin to imagine what this heat felt like, coupled with a fever. "Sit by the fire," Maxwell said again, this time in a slightly gentler tone. "And take this thermostone, too. Hold it close, you hear?" Weber nodded. It looked like Weber would need more than one cool thermostone, though. It was rapidly thawing and warming up. In addition, even when sitting, Weber looked like they were going to fall over at any moment. Immediately, Maxwell steadied Weber and walked over to his personal chest, where he kept all his belongings. "I know I have a straw roll in here," Maxwell muttered, digging through the chest. "Unless someone took it." No, here it is, yes, here." He walked back over to Weber and spread the straw roll out on the floor. "Lay down."
Thank you,
Maxwell hopped out of the way of a few stray drops of mucus, doing his best to hide his repulse. "Look, pal, you need to cover your mouth," he snapped, pulling out a handkerchief from his pocket and bending down, handing it to the miserable spider. Weber blew their nose, their nostrils. They didn't really have a nose, and looked up at the man.
Thank you, Mr. Maxwell. We will cover our nose next time. We're sorry."
"I accept your apology. Does your throat hurt?" Weber nodded. When I was a young boy, my mother would make me tea with honey to soothe a sore throat, Maxwell said, thinking aloud. I'm not sure if it'll work, but I could try to make you some tea, perhaps. Weber's eyes, all 8 of them, lit up.
Tea? That sounds wonderful, Mr. Maxwell.
We don't have much to work with, Maxwell continued, but I'm sure I can improvise. Go to sleep while the tea is getting ready, Maxwell ordered softly. Weber nodded and curled up in the straw bowl, holding the lying robot and the thermal stone close. Maxwell walked over to the crock pot and threw in 2 pieces of ice, honey, and some flower petals. He hoped it would work. He really did. This place was no place for a child, especially not an ill child. Though it technically wasn't fully his fault, he had to claim some responsibility for sending Weber here. Oh dear, it appeared the tea was going to take longer than expected. This was good news and bad news. Good news because it meant the crock pot was actually going to yield something of use and not white goo. Bad news because it meant Weber would have to suffer with a sore throat for longer. While the crock pot gurgled and sputtered, Maxwell kept an eye on Weber. The poor child just couldn't seem to fall asleep. They tossed and turned, and every time they managed to fall asleep, they'd cough and wake themselves up. They shivered from the coldness in the endothermic fire one moment and began to sweat and hug the cold thermal stone closer the other. Maxwell remembered the many days he had spent home as a child, suffering from fevers. He recalled feeling like his body was on fire one moment, and then frozen over the next. This is probably what Weber was experiencing. You all right there, pal? Maxwell called. As much as he tried to hide it, concern was heard in his voice.
Yes, sir,
Weber said.
I don't feel well, that's all.
Weber sat up to cough. Minutes upon minutes passed, but the coughing didn't subside. Each one sounded more painful than the next, filling Maxwell with fear. He walked over, crouched down, and gave Weber some firm pats on the back. Breathe, pal. Can you breathe? Steady now. Steady. Weber coughed and coughed, the phlegm rumbling in their chest. Once the sputum was more or less cleared, Weber's breathing returned to normal, and they closed their eyes.
I can breathe,
they said, though their voice was weak now. Loud wheezing was heard as Weber attempted to steady their breath. Your breathing sounds like a train whistle. Take it easy the rest of the day. Suddenly, the crock-pot's sputtering ceased. The tea is ready, Maxwell commented, walking over and lifting the lid off the crock-pot. What swirled inside was a pink, translucent liquid that emitted a pleasant aroma. It seems it actually turned out decent. Maxwell washed out one of the healing salve bowls. Unfortunately, he had nothing better for Weber to use as a mug, so this would have to suffice. Drink it down, pal, Maxwell said, bringing over the bowl full of makeshift tea and sitting down next to Weber.
It smells scrumptious, Mr. Maxwell,
Weber said, flashing a sharp fanged smile.
Thanks so much.
They drained the bowl, and their jaws were suddenly forced open with a yawn they couldn't suppress. You should get some sleep, Maxwell said. Sleep is important when you're ill.
Mom used to say that, too,
Weber said, yawning again. They suddenly leaned down, laying their head in Maxwell's lap. Maxwell stiffened at the sudden movement, but he didn't object. If Weber needed a parental figure to make them feel better when they were feeling unwell, then maybe Maxwell could put his aloofness aside for once and just roll with it. After all, that'd be the decent thing to do. In contrast to earlier, when Weber tossed and turned on the straw roll, they fell right asleep within minutes, curling up into a fetal position. Maxwell looked down, a shadow of a smile on his face. Sleep well, kid, Maxwell said, patting Weber's back.